Rabbi Akiva didn't start learning until he was 40 years old. There is a tale told of him, a parable. There was once a stonecutter who lived in a village that was grappling with drought. And the people of the town were losing faith, had no ability to understand a future before them. And so as they were starving and thirsty, the stonecutter left the village and climbed a nearby mountain. There he took out a small little hammer and a small little chisel, and he started to chisel away little pebbles off the mountain. He would fill his pockets with the pebbles, would descend the mountain, and would deposit them in a river that was nearby. And then he would go back home and fall asleep. And the next day he would do the same thing, climbing the mountain, chiseling up pebbles and depositing them in the river. Finally, after weeks of this, the people of the town decided to follow the stonecutter. And they sat at his feet on the top of the mountain and said to him, "What do you possibly think that you're doing?" And the stonecutter said, "Isn't it obvious? I'm moving this mountain." And the people of the town said, "That's insanity. That's ridiculous. What do you possibly hope to accomplish by chiseling off pebbles off a mountain?" And the stonecutter said, "Don't you understand? This mountain isn't in the right place. If this mountain was over there in that river, the river would flow where it's supposed to, which is right to us, allowing our crops to be irrigated and for us to find sustenance and bounty in a brilliant future. And so I am taking my little hammer and my little chisel, and I'm moving this mountain." And so the rabbis taught this of Rabbi Akiva, that at the age of 40, he came by and saw a small little drop of water falling from a little crack in a rock by a mountainside. And the drop was falling on a rock beneath it. And noticed that the drops of water, over time, had slowly started to carve away from the mountain a little pool, a little concave bowl in the rock. And he said that if one little drop of water has the power to do this, then surely I, even at the age of 40, will be able to glean the wisdom of this world. And it's from that teaching that came the very famous Kabbalistic understanding that one cannot engage in mystical works and learning until you are 40 years old. Because if the great Rabbi Akiva, the only one of these rabbis who could ascend and descend without dying, if the moment that he started learning was at age 40, all the more so for any of us regular people. But it also suggests something tremendous, that mystical wisdom can be gained by anyone, regardless of background. That the deepest wisdom can be found in something as simple as a drop of water. That what is access to the divine realm does not require power or potency or even the credentials of lots of rabbinic pieces of paper on your wall. That all it takes is a person willing to walk in the wilderness of the world and, like Ezekiel, stop beside a bit of water and notice that there is a deeper truth to be held there. So for us, living in 2019, part of why I found it worth surfacing some of these pillars of Merkava mysticism is because it offers us an interesting challenge today, and perhaps especially in a community that has steeped itself so much in a philosophy of understanding that the greatest truths of this world may be found in every corner. And as a Swami said to me a few years ago, that one of the lessons of true wisdom in this world is recognizing, both with humility, that there is always what to be learned from another person. Also the confidence to know that there is always what wisdom that we may be able to convey to the world around us. And for all of us here, early Jewish mysticism was founded on the idea that we could take one simple chapter of text and through it find the very keys to help us understand something deeper. In a world, especially in New York, where we often walk through this city and we find ourselves in the intellectual trap of always asking, "Hey, did you read that New Yorker article?" Or, "Surely you caught this piece on the Atlantic." We find ourselves trying to consume as much material as possible and sometimes forget that it's not the quantity of the material, but the quality of the material and our willingness to sit in something as simple as just a few letters and words. We see that for the mystics, this was often not climbing to the tops of mountains, but sometimes simply sitting beside the humble stream, that they would find the very thing they sought for all along. We find that angels are not necessarily the things that dwell up above, but may very much be the very things that are here amongst us. We come to see that the very things that terrify us in this world may also be the very source of understanding truth, as well as something as simple as laughter and joy may be the voice of God calling out to us. We come to see that for many of us, we seek the unusual, and often through the unusual only find the usual. And what it would be for us to flip that on its head? What would it be if we walked the same path again, to take the usual walk, and to perhaps in that usual way come to find something unusual that calls out to us? And perhaps another lesson for us today is to see that for these early mystics, they confused ascending and descending, I think purposefully. Many of us, we want to rise up from where we are. We want to lift our heads a bit higher. We want to feel more worth and value in this world. And in that desire for inflation, sometimes we end up descending in our quality of character. We don't have to look far in this world to see that the people who often purport to have wisdom often have the very lack of it. That it is often the very people of humility that lower themselves that are our greatest of teachers. And so I think it is no accident that the mystics would call themselves the Yordei Merkava, the descenders into the chariot. Perhaps a reminder for us that we should look for not only the ways that we can lower ourselves just a bit, but also to look in the world around us to see that perhaps the most apparently lowly may be the most spiritually lofty. The early mystics would often tell stories of rabbis of great arrogance and knowledge that would travel the various roads of the world and would be blind to see the greatest sages were the very people that actually pulled them and their horses. There was a story of one rabbi who came to a town and saw a lowly beggar on the street and scoffed at the beggar for addressing him, a great rabbi, with such disdain, begging, for surely a rabbi should never sink so low as to lift up a struggling person on the world. And then the prophet Elijah, the great prophet who had been taken by the divine chariot, comes to visit this rabbi and says, "You forever will live amongst the maggots of the world, for you failed to see that an angel of God was in your midst." What it would be for us to look to each person we encounter and believe that the person we encounter may indeed be one of those angels, both the person that can entice us into the divine realms, but also may help safeguard us from going to places that we are not meant to go to. What would it be if we brought the humility, but also perhaps the belief in oneself that maybe we are one of those angels? And maybe the divine truth that echoes forward now thousands of years later more than any other, which is that this was never meant to be something that was commercialized with Kabbalistic red strings or with specially purified water that cost $20 a bottle. That mystical truths are embedded into this world. And last year I mentioned this at the Interfaith Conference that I had the honor of being with you in. Joseph Campbell, he said that every stream of philosophy and religious tradition was simply a different path up the same mountain. And the farther along the path you go, the more similar the viewpoint. And part of what I love most about mysticism is that if you sit in the mystical works of any faith tradition, you will see almost identical imagery, almost identical teachings. and this teaching more than any other, which is to say that mysticism is not a secret philosophy that only a few can hold on to, though many try to protect it from being so. It is actually a truth that vibrates in everything and everyone. It is in the trees and the glass of water. It is in the face of the person beside us, and it is, yes, right here within us. And it is in engaging in our own spiritual practices that we come to see that it is but one path to realize that ultimate truth, that everything is one, that everything is connected, that each of these palaces is getting us deeper and deeper to the true chariot of God, which is a voice that calls out to every one of us, a voice of love, a voice of embrace, a voice of connection, and a voice that invites us to lovingly say, we are all one. At the end of every Jewish prayer service, we come to a line that says, on that day, a day that we yearn and hope for in the future, on that day, God's name will be one and God will be one. As though to say, right now, God's name is not one, and right now, God is not one. And why is that? It's so long as we fail to realize that God is one and that God's name is one. That if we fail to realize that we are one, if we fail to see the connection of me to this podium, to this chair, to the flowers, to the water, if we fail to see that connectedness, then like that Rabbi Ben Zoma who said water, water, or flower, flower, or podium, podium, or Adonai, Adonai, we have failed to understand the deepest of truths. And it is so long as we do that that we will always be cutting the shoots. We will always be creating separation. The ultimate teaching is that God will be one when we see that God is one, and that God will be one when we see that we are one. So thank you for the chance to get to be with you this morning.